Mayor Don McCormick, oddly enough, I was reading about a mystic not long ago, and the mystic who has been practicing his mysticism in one particular area that he says applies to everybody, of course. He said in the morning he gets up really early and he spends the first 30 minutes getting to yes. And I thought, well, he said, I know it'll sound woo-woo, but I wake up and I think, all the things I don't want to do, no, I have to get away from all those things. No, I don't want to do that. I need to get to yes and open myself up to yes and, not no but. I sort of have the feeling that Kimberley has had in the 10 years we've been here, a kind of getting to yes attitude, perspective, and as you think about the state of our city, have we gotten to at least more yes?
Or a good solid maybe.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Paula. And I guess this is my ninth year, I guess, that I've been on council, and my answer 9 years ago would have been a little bit different than what I'm going to answer today. I think human nature is such that we only change when we are required to change. It's not something we like to do or
let's
anticipate.
change.
And 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, the city was in a real state of transition. In fact, it was probably transitioning late, given that the mine closed in 2001.
And we're now in 2020.
And we're now in 2020. And in 2012, 13, kind of 10 years after, I think the community as a whole came to the realization that if we didn't make some changes, we were going in the wrong direction. And so at the time I was first elected mayor, there was a real mood for change. People knew that change of some kind needed to happen. I ran on a platform of change and managed to be successful at that time. So over that time,
and then again, it's worth saying.
Yeah, and the job wasn't quite done in 4 years. There was we need to finish the job that we started was basically the message I was giving back in 2018. And I think what I've observed is that we've come a long way. First of all, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've come a very long way by almost any metric that you wish to use. What's interesting is that. First of all, we're not where we need to be. It's better, and I think as residents and taxpayers, we need to realize that it is only just better, and that given that we rely on tourism for most of our economic activity, and tourism being as fickle as it is, we can't rest, and we need to do the things and make the changes we need to make in order to get to the next level, and then there will be another and another after that, before we can feel like we're insulated from all the bad things that we could slip back into.
And one of those things you off camera, you had said that there is still concern about asset sales, and that's part of this picture of which you speak, isn't it?
Well, it's part of what would be considered a real change, right? It's all part of the change thing. What I've observed is that as things have gotten better, there is a resistance to change happening. And the asset sale would be a really good example of that, where there is...
and the assets are?
When it was first announced that we were selling Bootleg Golf and the Riverside Campground, there were a portion of the population that understood what we were doing and the rationale for it, but there was a very large portion that didn't like it at all.
Are they still going to pay taxes? Or will they now pay taxes?
Absolutely. There's a lot of very good reasons why we're doing this, but without understanding what those reasons were, there were lots of people that said you should never be selling these kinds of assets. They're making money, so why would you sell them? And, the really simple answer to that is twofold. Number one, we need the money. And aside from going back to taxpayers and asking for more money, this is a source of new revenue that will allow us to keep our tax rates manageable for lots of people in town. And the second reason, we need the money. And the second reason is because they're making money. Assets are at their maximum value when they're in fact profitable.
And can they change use? I mean, once somebody buys it, can they turn it into a a mega mall?
Well, this is the concern, that most people have, and I find it kind of interesting because, council and senior management at the city of Kimberley are tasked with managing our assets and managing them in a way that's in the best interest of the taxpayer. And yet when a change like this happens, it's the worst possible thing. We are going out and we're going to destroy the assets that we have. I find it counterintuitive, but I guess it's, in the absence of answers to all of the questions, people fear uncertainty and doubt reigns. Not dissimilar to the coronavirus that we're going through right now. The fact is that, so far this flu season, more than 12,000 people have died from the common flu. And when you compare that to what's happening with the coronavirus, it's, you have to ask yourself, what are we concerned about? Well, what we're concerned about is the unknown. It's what could happen given that we don't have all of the detail.
So specifically with those two big pieces of land.
So we will end up generating in the neighborhood of $5 or $6 million in cash for the city of Kimberley. We will get taxes back from those organizations. And in the case of the golf course, the taxes are going to be what the lease payment the city was getting. In the case of the campground, when you combine taxes along with the utilities payments that we're going to be getting and some other considerations, we are at a minimum at a break even on a cash flow basis and have $5 or $6 million in the bank to be able to top up our reserve funds, which are critically important from an infrastructure renewal point of view, and give us, even after the reserves are topped up, it will give us additional money in the Kimberley Reserve Fund to be able to take advantage of opportunities when they come up, particularly from a granting point of view.
And back to that mega mall.
What she's asking is the land use. How radically can we change is somebody going to change the land use?
I wasn't ignoring that question, Paula. The answer is that in the course of setting up the RFP, the city has put together conditions under which the sale is happening that will preclude that from happening. And in the case of the golf course, the biggest concern people have is that some real estate developer is going to come in and buy it and going to build big homes, and eventually the golf course will be gone. Well, the fact is that that entire property has a restricted certificate of compliance on it that precludes any real estate development from happening there ever. So,
is that a local thing?
No, it's the Ministry of Environment. Based on the previous usage of that land and its degree of contamination, it's being used as a golf course, and it will be that way. At the provincial
level, you just don't get to mess with it.
Well, it would be virtually impossible. I mean, it's taken us 12 or 14 years now to try and get 14 acres up on the Marysville bench, certified. Believe me, the golf course. I mean, this is just not a consideration.
It's also worth saying this is a very tourism dependent economy. Those both are tourist related.
Oh, huge.
And there's no guarantee, given that a lot of that is weather dependent and the weather is changing, that tourism is going to be, I mean, if I own that property, I would think seriously about selling it to someone who has more faith in the future of tourism than otherwise. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, if you take those resources and spread them out so that we develop the economy in a broad sense of our community, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and with some explication, it can make sense to a lot of people who are still a little concerned.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think what I've learned through this whole process is that, and as it was with the other assets, that are sold, there are certain people that until it's a done deal and there's a year or two, past the closing of the deal, when they see that disaster in fact is not going to happen, that's the only time they're going to be satisfied. So I think what we need, both from a council and from a senior management point of view, is a good plan, an understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. We take a look at the risks associated with it, and we get on with getting it done. We get to yes,
there you go.
very quickly.
Part of what you're talking about change, and it could sound, as you talked about it, that we had to make a change, then we're going to sit for a while. And my impression is what you and your colleagues are trying to do, and I think the community mostly is trying to forgive me, institutionalized change. That instead of lurching from crisis to crisis, looking up and saying, where did that come from? And I think that's part of the process that you and the council over the last, into the second term, your second term, have tried to do, which is to set up the mechanisms, the tools, the procedures, the processes for institutionalizing an early warning system, looking forward enough and having the tools to address what looks like is going to happen 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
And then be able to adapt if and when it doesn't. And that might get us to the state of the city, which does both the looking backward and looking forward. Is that right?
It is. Not so much looking backward as much as recognizing the trends that are happening with the various metrics that we're using to determine whether we're moving forward or, backwards. And this year in particular, I guess this is the fourth year that I've been doing the State of the City now. And each year, our ability to produce the metrics and to show trends is getting better and better. So I think...
that took a lot of work, too.
I think people will be quite riveted, if I can use that strong a word, to some of the data points as they come. And from my point of view, the way we use those at the city is to take a look at the trends and try and be in front of the next incremental change that needs to happen to ensure that we're trending in the right direction. And I think getting back to your comment about institutionalizing change, Bill, I guess a lot of people look at change as an event. It's this thing is happening that's different from before, when in fact what we're doing is we're evolving ourselves forward, and it's a sequence of changes that when you put it all together, you see this trend that says, wow, we're going in the right direction.
And a wise old, very, very old, he was 97 at the time, person said to me, Paula, remember, change is the only constant.
It's so true.
So you want to talk about particulars?
Particular changes?
No, particulars in how you're thinking about the state of the city.
You and the council have figured out how to structure. You're asking substantive questions on the front end and then trying to collect the information necessary to respond to what seems to be the important issues in the community, and doing that with a finite number of issues.
Right. Well, if we go back to 2014, right following that election, what we did as a council is sat down. Scott Somerville, our chief admin officer, facilitated a session around establishing what we called at the time strategic priorities. They were basically this one or two or three things that staff could use in order to frame decisions that are being made. In other words, we have a limited amount of money, just resources, not just money, but resources. And how do we make sure that we are spending those resources in a way that maximizes the value back to the taxpayers? So we came up with a list of 5. And in 2018, following the last election, we sat down, again, a similar session, and we took a look at those 5, took a look at the progress we've made, and said, okay, what changes do we wish to make? So we ended up with basically carrying 3 of those priorities over. 2 of them weren't established as priorities, but they were still a big deal. One was customer service, which is always a big deal, but we felt that we had made enough movement on that we didn't have to isolate that as a specific priority. And the same thing with communication. We moved a light year in 4 years with respect to how we're communicating to the community as a whole, to our taxpayers. We just made a lot of improvements. On both of those, we continue to improve. Incremental improvement is kind of the order of the day. But we felt that from a strategic point of view, there were a couple of other things that deserved to be on the list for this term more than those 2. One of them was the focus on core services. In other words, we all have talked about infrastructure renewal. We get that sewer and water and roads, garbage, these kinds of things are our core services. And we felt that it was important to identify those core services and make sure that the money we had available was going in and moving those along this infrastructure renewal line at a pace that made sense. So we identified core services as a strategic priority. And The second one was reducing our environmental impact as a city, as a municipality, and also as a community. And so, pardon me, with those two additions, the three remaining had to do with financial accountability with respect to taxes and how we respect taxpayer money, infrastructure renewal, as I've already mentioned, and the third was facilitating a diverse economy. We called it economic development the first time around, but economic development has proven to be a very nebulous term, and it's almost the eye of the beholder when it comes to defining what that means. So facilitating a diverse economy, more than just tourism, is how we framed it this time around. So on Wednesday night at the State of the City, the metrics, where we've been, where we're going, the trends, and the priorities are all framed around these 5 strategic priorities. Everything is in one of those buckets, so that I think it will make lots of sense, to people as they're listening.
Since you're interested in communication, will that be available in hard or soft copy going forward?
Well, my presentation will be available. Yeah, it's a good question, Paula. I think there's an opportunity to look at how we communicate this in a much broader sense, which we're still talking about. So we may see, some additions to that between now and Wednesday. We don't want to make it so good on the broad context that nobody shows up.
Well, I don't think that's a problem.
Otherwise, it becomes a webinar, for goodness sake. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with webinars.
So, but we do want to get this out, as broadly as we can. And in fact, what it will be is kind of a not a dry run, but a proxy for the annual report, which comes out in May. And Scott and I have talked about how we'd really like to be doing the State of the City update at the same time as the annual report is published. So, I think if we did that, we'd have a lot more people reading the annual report, which would be the answer to your question. But we'll see how that evolves.
Well, that actually is the answer. I mean, that is available. The annual report is available on your website if you really want to know. Rather than calling up and yelling at you, start with the annual report.
So the most important, if history is any gauge, the most important part of this whole thing Wednesday night is going to be the question and answer at the end. Mm-hmm. I mean, I will present, a formal, probably for about 45 minutes, a formal presentation that talks about all these things. But then I'm going to throw it open for just questions and answers. And in previous years, we've had the better part of an hour, of Q&A. And in fact, I think in every year we've had to cut off the questions because it's just gotten late and we've had to leave the facility. So I expect that again.
The last time we talked, the city was on a run with new development coming in, and the expenditures on construction.
Right.
Through three quarters of the 4-quarter year. Now that we've passed the final quarter, how did we end up in 19?
Well, we finished the year off in pretty much spectacular fashion. The total value of building permits for 2019 was $32 million. Wow. To put that in perspective, it was $15 million the previous year, $15 million the previous year to that. And then it dropped all the way off down to $5 or $6 million going back into 2013.
But those are all considered. Those are all within frameworks. It isn't just wild, old west, if you will, speculative development.
Not at all. In fact, none of it is speculative. The vast majority is residential construction, whether it be renovations to existing homes, which continues to be very strong. Or new dwelling development, which would be single-family homes, multi-unit residential, carriage homes, suites, that kind of thing. And we generated, and this was kind of a big deal because we generated 83 or 84 new dwellings last year. The previous year was 42, I believe, and that was the biggest ever since like 2007.
I want just a bit of a context. I am so excited that after my whole lifetime, I can now recycle virtually everything.
Yeah.
And that's, I say this, my garbage once a week is this big. literally.
Yeah.
But I say all of this in the context of you didn't do that alone. And Kimberley doesn't do anything alone. We're in the context of the RDEC, of
Yeah.
the province, and this interrelationship. It's not like we're just this little town that's getting bigger and better and all of that. It all has to fit together, doesn't it?
It does. The one thing I will say about Kimberley is that we try to be on the forefront of a lot of this change. Now, the theory is, and we're not doing that just for posterity, the theory, not even the theory, the practicality of it is that as we move into these things, money in the form of either grants or money available to make these things happen comes to those that are quickest out of the gate. And in fact, not just money, but resources to help make these things happen. And so over the past 5 years, with a lot of things that we've been involved in, we've tried to be aggressive. If we decide we're going to do it, we try and be very aggressive and be first in. And in doing that, we get all kinds of resources to make it happen.
This is a positive feedback loop. If you can, if you can figure it out, everything you do generates more and more and more, which is, redefining. In a way, that's a good reason to redefine economic development as a much broader process.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also have an extraordinary force with the Columbia Basin Trust. And I never really forget to say 1, 2, 3, and the Columbia Basin Trust, which has had such a profound impact across the Columbia Basin on both sides of the 49th parallel.
Well,
They don't fund on the other side, but the basin is on the other side too.
And it continues to. There are, if you translate, I mean, the money is one thing. There's about $63 million a year that CBT has been putting into the basin communities, and that's 40 some communities within the basin, 175,000 people. So that is a massive impact on a population that is it's that small. I mean, 175,000 is a pretty small population to say we're just going to drop $63 million in.
And we're required to.
And it's not just about the money. It's about how that money is framed. And there are more than 70 different programs across the entire basin that money is supporting. So it's really, really high impact. No question about it.
I want to go back to the housing piece for a moment. That housing is a problem all over at least the developed world, and probably all over the world for different reasons. It's a major issue in Canada. It's a major issue in the U.S. It's a major issue in Europe. Affordability and just the accessibility more broadly. Are we now ahead of the curve on that? Are we catching up?
I wish.
Are we?
No, we're not. We're treading water, I guess would be the best way to describe it. 80 new dwellings at an average of 2.1 people per dwelling. I mean, we're looking at about, say, 170 people we now have additional housing for. That happens to be what our population rate is growing at, about 150 to 200 people a year. So all we're doing is holding steady. So in my opinion, we still have a fairly significant supply issue. We need to get supply to the point where we have vacancy and we have a healthy list of homes for sale and rental vacancies.
But at what point do you say enough? Do you really want enough housing so you can have 45,000 people live here?
I don't think it works that way, Paula. I think what's happening is that I mean, we talk about Kimberley, to be a really good place to be. We understate kind of what we're doing, and I think that kind of understatement and kind of the vibe that we've got going on around town is attracting people. People want to live in Kimberley, and we as a municipality or as a community don't get to dictate how many or who comes in. We will reach a point, I think, where the population will reach a certain stage where things begin to change. They could change in a very positive way and continue, that momentum could continue, or they could change in a way that people say, that's it. There's other places where I like the vibe better and I'm going to move there. There's this kind of equilibrium that you end up getting. Right now, we are a place where people want to live, and it behooves us as a municipality to try and create the kind of environment that will encourage builders and developers to bring supply in. It's a very symbiotic kind of thing. And I think if we mess around or try and limit that kind of thing in any way, shape, or form, we risk destroying the vibe. And so we're a facilitator, and as long as people want to live here, then, we're going to try and make that happen.
Symbiotic sounds a lot like life.
Yeah, indeed.
You spend probably more time out talking to a broad range of people than anybody in the community. I can't think of anybody that, isn't specialized in talking just to a target group that's out more. You've been doing that for several years. Have you seen, you talk about the vibe, but have you seen a movement, a change in how people feel about the community, how people feel about the environment, how people feel about one another? How has it changed, or has it changed?
So that's probably a difficult question.
I thought it might be.
For a precise answer. I think that any community, the lifeblood of every community is young families, right? It's young families coming, lots of kids, the schools are full. That creates a certain dynamic in town that I think every vibrant community needs to have. We have that. If you look at where, the fastest growing portion of our community, if just by Canada's census data alone, it's in the younger demographic. We continue to grow on the senior side of things as the boomer population continues to age, and we attract boomers with our outdoor recreation lifestyle. We will continue to grow there, but we are really growing at the young end of the scale. Our schools are full, which creates a really interesting issue for School District 6. So that is definitely a change. 10, 15 years ago, we were closing schools, and now we're bursting at the seams and saying, where are we going to go with this? So that's one visible change. The other one has to do just about the change in the workforce. The profile of the workforce. And right now, with all of the construction that we've got going on, I don't know that there's ever been a better time for trades. And we've got lots of grads coming out of College of the Rockies. And we've got, pretty much, if somebody wants to be employed, you can be employed the way the activity is going on right now. That hasn't always been the case. In the 15 years ago, we had a population that needed to work the Elk Valley or, in northern Saskatchewan or northern Alberta.
We were still a mining economy.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So that's changed. We've also seen a change in the retail. I'll use the term retail demographic, or the description of what we have as retail establishments. We no longer have, similar stores to Cranbrook. I think we've got a lot more unique boutique opportunities that are attracting people from Cranbrook to come here to shop, as opposed to us wanting to stop people from going to Cranbrook, which is what it was like 15 years ago. That's been a big change. That transition in our retail environment, retail is ever transitioning. In any given community, there's probably a 20% turnover a year. Ours isn't that high. We've got it relatively low. But by the same token, we are still ever changing. The city of Kimberley commissioned a report here a year ago. It was basically a gap analysis, a retail gap analysis, to try and understand where are people spending their money, how are they spending it, and what do we need here in order for them to spend more money here. That is going to be published in the next little while, and I haven't seen it, but hopefully we'll learn something from that and help again facilitate the evolution of our retail environment as well. So there's just some examples, and I could probably cite a few others that these are all really positive changes that have led to this dynamic of people wanting to live in Kimberley.
And we do.
Yeah, do we ever? It's an awesome community.
Thank you for leading it, and we will look forward to how we can participate in that process.
My pleasure, Paula. Thank you for having me.